Hi everyone, and welcome to the crime scene search pattern video lecture. Now, it's time to actually search the scene. The best crime scene searches are those that are systematic and methodical. This is the only way to ensure that you examine all the areas of the crime scene for potential evidence. There are several different types of crime scene search patterns. The choice of search pattern depends entirely on the investigator's preference and also and also the scene characteristics. A line search uses straight lines and multiple searchers to search the scene. In the sketch shown here, all of these black lines in the sketch represent a different person. The searchers will be placed together and asked to walk forward in straight lines, allowing the entire scene to be searched in a single pass. This type of search technique is common in outdoor scenes, where you can use numerous volunteers to search large areas more quickly. Oftentimes, civilians are used to assist with this type of outdoor search, and so usually anything identified will be marked with a flag and then processed later by crime scene investigators after the line search is complete. In a line search, the distance between each searcher will depend on the nature of the terrain and the scene conditions. If you're looking for a child's body and the child only went missing a few days ago, you would not need searchers elbow to elbow because the suspected evidence, in this case a child's body, should be big enough to see fairly easily. However, if you're looking for this child's body after several months or even years later, you're going to naturally expect to be looking for smaller bone fragments and pieces rather than a fully intact skeleton. In that case, it makes sense to put searchers closer together so they don't overlook the small pieces of evidence between them. Terrain and weather conditions also play a role in the searcher-to-searcher distance. Tall grasses, rocky areas, nighttime searches, all of these require tighter formations to ensure that nothing is missed by the searchers. You can see in this photograph that the searchers are standing pretty close to one another, which is understandable given the amount of tree and leaf debris as well as the uneven terrain that they're ready to cover. The line search can also be done indoors with a single investigator walking back and forth from one end of the scene to the other, like the search shown on the sketch. Now, the grid search is another searching technique that's ideal for outdoor scenes. A grid is physically laid out with boundary markers like crime scene tape, chalk, whatever. Each part of the grid is given a label, and then an investigator will search within the specific grid area for evidence. To help ensure the quality of the search, a double search involving another investigator searching the same grid again can be used to make sure there was no overlooked evidence. Indoors, the grid search typically refers to two line searches that overlap at 90-degree angles. As you can see from this photograph, the investigator first walks through the scene north to south. Then the investigator switches direction and completes the search moving east to west. The advantage of this type of search is that it provides multiple passes over each area, and that helps investigators make sure that they have not overlooked important evidence. Now, the next type that's discussed in your textbook is the zone search pattern, which is really similar to the grid search. In a zone search, the search area is split into several zones, and one investigator is assigned to each zone. Zones are typically square, but they don't have to be, and that makes them distinct from the grid. So zones could be odd-shaped depending on the scene conditions. For example, your textbook talks about how when faced with a full house to process, crime scene investigators may split each room into its own zone. So one investigator gets the bedroom, one gets the living room, so on and so forth. Zone searches are really helpful with large outdoor scenes and buried remains as well, because they can help ensure that every part of the scene is checked thoroughly. Zone searches are also really useful for vehicle searches, and you can see an example of a zoning diagram for a vehicle on this slide. The ray or the wheel search is a search pattern that's completed by picking a center point and then searching outwards in straight lines from that point. This isn't an ideal search technique for most scenes because it can be difficult for investigators to identify where have I already searched, and losing evidence between straight lines becomes more possible than with the other techniques discussed. However, it does have its specific uses, particularly in explosive scenes where the primary evidence is going to be at the center of the detonation. In reality, though, as your textbook notes, this is not usually an ideal search pattern that is used very often. Now, spiral searches deviate from those that we've discussed previously because they don't use straight lines. Instead, spiral searches can either spiral out from a main point or they can spiral into a main point. Like the ray searches, these aren't usually helpful on typical crime scenes because it makes it difficult for the investigators to document where they have and where they have not searched before. However, this type of search is very helpful for unique crime scenes like underwater evidence because even in low visibility conditions, the crime scene investigator can search the water bottom in a spiral by hand in order to help them locate evidence. All right, well, that's it for this lecture. Thanks for watching, everyone.